These events took place several years ago, before the Waldorf Astoria began its reconstruction. The elegant vestibule stretched from Park Avenue to Lexington Avenue. In the middle stood a large clock, richly decorated and gilded, with the Statue of Liberty on top. When you are there, I'm sure they will still be there to see the landmark. An ideal place to start celebrating a wedding anniversary. Robert Jones, an experienced editor of a well-known newspaper, hurried down the street through swirling snowflakes to meet his wife of 25 years and a successful marketing manager, and was, of course, already there, always on time. They were a strong couple, accomplished, respected, independent, and devoted to each other. Robert was a gracefully aging, successful man, whose charm and sharp mind made him invaluable in the main news department, and was the driving force behind many of the most successful marketing campaigns in the cosmetics industry, charming herself and known for not suffering fools, regardless of their race, creed, or gender. Robert reached into his pocket. Who knows how many times he had done this while rushing here. Christmas coincided with their 25th wedding anniversary. A long, thin box contained a diamond necklace he had made for her, with 25 stones. His love for her traced in precious gems. He had secretly saved money for several years to afford this gift. Robert loved beautiful words, so the box bore an intricate inscription, "Our love in diamonds." Why such an extravagant gift? Of course, 25 years was a milestone in itself, and Christmas was always special for them. They had met at a Christmas Eve party and held a date party every year in honor of this wonderful holiday. Due to the snow, the night felt special, and he felt his excitement growing as he hurried to his beloved woman. The Salvation Army Brass Quartet stood by the Central Station, and he crossed the street to make a donation. This slowed him down, but he couldn't help himself. It was Christmas. Even inspired by the Christmas spirit, he felt there had been dark times in their life together. It seemed they were drifting apart. Anne's career growth in her company burdened her with increased responsibilities and a new need for travel. Robert led a group of young reporters, full of energy but with little experience and a great potential to land his beloved newspaper in court if not firmly guided. They had started seeing each other less, and Robert feared that he and Anne were beginning to get used to it, and suggested that they not pay so much attention to holidays and find something they wanted to do, possibly together, but possibly not. He hoped to capture Anne's attention and draw her away from what absorbed her, to join him in renewing their marriage. He was confident and would never deceive him. Their relationship had always been strong, and he trusted her. It never crossed Robert's mind to ask if Anne was happy with the state of their relationship. Some things should be taken for granted. Isn't that what trust meant? Robert carried flowers in his hands. He hummed a Christmas tune, walking with a spring in his step. He couldn't wait to embrace and whisk her away into the magical night he had planned for them. At that moment, a few men exited the bar, and was right behind them, standing by the clock and looking around. Of course, she was happy, and was never late, while Robert, it seemed, was always late. "And hello, my love." One of the men separated from the group to approach her, tightly embraced her, and kissed and gently on the lips. In her confusion, she instinctively responded deeply to his kiss. "Mike, darling, what are you doing here?" Realizing that her husband could appear at any moment, and, visibly flustered, pulled away. But it was too late. Robert had already seen what had happened. He stopped and stepped back to see what would follow, and was still looking around, clearly nervous. "I'm in town for a quick meeting, then flying out of Kennedy Airport to London on the first flight in the morning. Are you free for love tonight?" Your husband. Without even realizing it, Robert slowly moved towards them, listening with growing anxiety. Who was this man? What was he to Anne? He could see the wrapped gift in her hands. Was it for him? Or for this stranger? And their obvious love kiss in such a public place. "Robert Jones," he introduced himself. Anne's face froze, her gaze flicking between her lover and her husband. "I see you know my wife, and you are?" Bill Johnson," came the stammered reply. Bill looked helplessly at Anne. What was he supposed to say? "I see I've caught you both at an inconvenient time. You two should catch up, There are plenty of free rooms in the hotel if you haven't booked one yet. I must go, and perhaps we'll meet later. I'll call a taxi." Robert fumbled in his pocket, trying to get his phone. Instead, he found himself pulling out the gift box and nervously twisted her own gift in her hands, not knowing what to do. "And don't worry, I'll find my way." Robert looked down at the shiny long flat box with the sparkling black ribbon. Tears stood in his eyes. "And no matter what, this is for you." He turned away as he thrust the necklace into her hands. Behind him, he could hear cursing. They were exchanging angry words. He stopped paying attention to it. Robert needed to leave, to get away. How did it come to this? What had he missed, being so caught up in work? How could his and betray him like this? The wretched woman. Robert, Robert, and was calling him, but he was already on the top step of the staircase. Her voice grew closer, but he was already at the exit. A taxi was standing there, and he quickly got into it. Robert gave the address and disappeared, and watched as the taxi merged into the stream of cars. One taxi in a sea of vehicles, hopeless to find. What had she done? Robert was never supposed to know. She had been so careful. How could she? Who knew she would run into Bill? How could he be so stupid and reckless, approaching her so openly? Did Bill ruin everything? How couldn't fix this, if at all? Bill separated from his companions and finally caught up to her. "And, are you okay? Do you think he suspected anything? And, you saw that he understood everything. Of course, he suspected. And, I'm so sorry." And nodded and told Bill it wasn't his fault, but her entire demeanor blamed him. What gave him the right to treat her like that, in public, where anyone could see? Couldn't he have just greeted her and moved on? This was a disaster. Robert was devastated. She would have to change her schedule to find time for her husband. She would talk to Robert and explain why they had to overcome this unpleasant situation. Soon, and thought of what she would say to bring Robert back to his senses. It was a good plan, and saw no reason why it wouldn't work. Robert looked out of the taxi window at the passing lights. What had he missed? When had she managed to drift so far away? Was he angry? He felt that way, but if so, why didn't he scream and punch that bastard? Instead, he was alone, running away from his beloved wife, lost in mutual accusations, silent, trying not to cry. Whatever he felt, it was much more than anger. For the first time in his memory, Robert Jones didn't know what to do. He felt blinded, abandoned, and betrayed. When he returned home, Robert wasn't there, and it wasn't surprising. And changed clothes, dragged a chair from the living room to the hallway, and settled in, waiting for her husband's return. She woke up at sunrise to find that he hadn't come home, and she was alone. It was Saturday. He must have rented a room. He would be home today. She suppressed the urge to call him on his mobile. He needs time to think, she told herself. When he calms down, as he always does, we'll talk and settle everything. By noon, and began to get nervous. By 3 in the afternoon, she was in a full panic. And called him on his mobile, at the office, at the gym, at 2 bars she knew he liked, half a dozen of his friends, and his mother, whom she never got along with. No one had heard anything about him. By Sunday, she called the NYPD, the FBI, the state police, and anyone else she could think of. A private detective was hired. Of course, she did all of this. Her husband was missing, and she needed to find him. For some desperate reason, she thought it would help if she went into the city and searched for Robert herself. The crowds of people out shopping turned her search into a futile effort. When she called her sister Beth for help, her family saw for the first time how dire the circumstances really were. By Sunday dinner, Anne's 2 sisters and their husbands, their children, her parents, her mother's sister Beverly, his mother, some of Robert's oldest friends, and her immediate colleagues from work had gathered in the dining room, listening to the detective. People go missing all the time. The holidays are always an inopportune time for emotional trauma, and Christmas especially. There was no reason to believe an accident had occurred or that Robert was injured. He experienced a strong emotional shock. This remark drew several sharp glances toward Anne. From everything the detective heard, Robert was a sensible guy. They should give him a chance to resurface and see what he says. And became furious, shouting. No, that wasn't all they could do. No, they weren't going to wait and see if her Robert's body floated in the river. The detective needed to put aside his other cases, do his job, and find her husband. Didn't they understand and wanted to scream at them? She needed her husband. She needed to talk to him, to explain. If anything happened to Robert, how would he ever understand her actions? How could he forgive her? How could she forgive herself? The detective said all the right things and slipped out the door. In reality, there wasn't much more he could do. This was Anne's mess, and it was her job to clean it up. His departure marked the beginning of the great angry argument. The attendees claimed they knew the right people who could do something and then hid behind their mobile phones, as if they had suddenly found something important. Anne's brother led the chorus, chastising the police for not doing more. Both mothers sympathized with the misfortune that had befallen their families. Truth be told, they felt powerless and knew it, and they feared what might happen, and felt the disdain from her sisters. Beth announced that the Christmas dinner was canceled, and until Robert was found, she preferred that the family give each other some space. As the voices grew louder and fell silent, her anger was exhausted, and fear gripped her throat. When Beth made her announcement and realized she had no voice in this room, what could she say to people who cared about her husband more than she did, and learned what it meant to be truly alone? Eventually, everyone left. She went up to her bedroom to change. Her dress from Friday evening was still lying on the bed. She picked it up and saw the gift box. What were Robert's last words? No, not the last. What did he say as he left? Whatever happens, this is for you. And read the inscription and opened the box. She took the sparkling necklace with a trembling hand. She fainted and fell, still holding the necklace. There were 3 days left until Christmas, and her husband was still missing. The police in the city have dormitories where they can eat and sleep during long shifts. Journalists know where these places are and have friends who will let them stay for a few nights when they can't or don't want to go home. Robert had used these places more than once in the past. The office was a 30-minute walk away, and Robert was still in the same clothes he had worn 3 nights ago. A quick stop at a men's clothing store fixed that. Another quick stop, and he bought a razor and shaving cream. No matter how bad things were, he still had to work. The newspaper had to go to print. Deadlines were deadlines. He used his voicemail to listen to calls, held a conference with colleagues at 9:15, met with the right people until noon, and spent the afternoon working on an article discussing sea level rise. The newspaper operated like all great bureaucracies. If you didn't know exactly how to reach the person you needed, there was no easy way to contact them. If and tried to reach him, she didn't succeed. Well, what could be said about that? As for Anne, she was frantic. Her father was ready to tell her to go home, but that would only make things worse. Her team combed through hotels, motels, and anywhere someone might stay, from Boston to Washington. She turned her entire department staff into a personal detective agency. If senior management didn't like it, she didn't care. At one point, Anne was heard shouting that they should start searching under bridges, indicating her growing desperation. Holly, the senior graphic artist, was the one who solved the mystery. Her father had served in the NYPD. The police have places where they can rest, she said. Within 20 minutes, Anne had a list of addresses and phone numbers. Within 2 minutes, each dormitory had been called. When the address where Robert was staying was confirmed, Anne was on her way. Robert was already feeling better. The duty sergeant had assured him that he could stay as long as he wanted. Work seemed to be going well. At least, it was functioning. On a beautiful, cold, clear morning, he went for a walk and stood in his path, no more than 50 feet ahead. Robert, I've been looking for you everywhere. And you found me. Robert suddenly felt detached, as if he were watching himself speak from the outside. Shouldn't he be more emotional, he wondered. Something was happening inside him, but he wasn't sure what it was. He could see, and with a surprising clarity. But despite how acutely he was aware of Anne's presence, Robert felt dead inside. It occurred to him that he should be more upset, but he wasn't. Had he lost all feeling? Please, Robert, let me explain. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want you to find out the way you did. Of course, but really, what is there to say? That you have affairs with other men. Now I know that. That you hid it from me. I know that too. That you were caught only by chance. Well, I was there. I don't want to hear about the dirty details or any silly stories that it was just sex and it meant nothing to us. What can you really say? And felt Robert slipping away and moved towards him, hoping to physically bridge their emotional distance. Do we have to talk about this publicly? Can't we go somewhere and just discuss everything? And I found out about this in a hotel lobby. What could be more public than that? If you have something to say, I suggest you say it now. This stopped her halfway and realized she wouldn't be able to lull Robert into a false sense of normalcy and then wear him down. Okay, Robert, let's talk. I love you so much. I've always loved you, but I started feeling restless. I didn't know what was wrong, and I didn't know how to tell you because I didn't understand it myself. When I got the promotion and spent so much time traveling, I was around many different men who paid attention to me. Sometimes they flirted with me, and I realized I liked it. The fact that they were new made their attention different. I wasn't restless anymore. I was excited to be appreciated as a woman. I needed that, and I couldn't ask you to give it to me. Would you have given me that permission? We've been together for so long. It wouldn't have been fair. And you could have told me all this at any time. That my beautiful wife gets compliments? You think I'm such a fool to be surprised or jealous? There was something else, wasn't there? You had sex with someone else? No details needed, just yes or no? And looked down and hesitated. To her credit, she looked her husband in the eyes and said, yes. And here we are. I don't know why or how we got here. I can't say where I failed you so badly that I lost you, but obviously, I did. Robert heard himself saying goodbye. Was he doing this because and had confirmed his worst fears? Or was it an unconscious decision he made when he left and with her lover at the hotel? He couldn't say. All he knew was that the words came out of his mouth. It felt as if someone had taken control of his mind and body, and he was just an observer. Robert realized he was walking past his wife and going his own way, and stood there in shock, trying to process what her husband had just said and done. It was just sex, a bit of excitement. It didn't mean anything. She loved only him. She had explained everything. Why couldn't he see that? Why didn't he believe her? The city blocks in downtown Manhattan are short on the north-south streets, but long on the east-west streets. A native New Yorker, and found herself lost on her way back to her office. She kept looking for landmarks, something to orient herself, but she was too distracted. She kept replaying Robert's words. He didn't mean all that, did he? Her feet hurt, she was cold, and her phone kept ringing, so she turned it off. There was a coffee shop, and she found a free seat. Why was Robert so angry, so sad? He hadn't really said anything. He didn't want details. How many men? Were they better lovers? Were they rich? Were they bigger than him? Better in bed? Isn't that what men want to know? Words they could throw in her face. All the possible reasons. Robert just didn't want to know. The mere fact that and had hidden what she was doing was enough to break him. Had she underestimated him? Was Robert really that weak? Why didn't he fight back? He should have claimed her and fought for her. That's what men do. It struck her later, like a sharp pain. No, fool. You broke your husband's heart because you didn't believe he would listen to you. You never gave him the chance to talk to you about what you wanted. You never told him you were changing. You didn't give him a chance to find ways that both of you could use to make it work. Why should Robert believe you now when you didn't trust him before? No, and the truth is that you were afraid Robert would say no, and even if he did, you would still cheat on him. You didn't love him enough to tell him and live with the consequences. You made him second to your lover and yourself. You lied about it. You betrayed him for sex, and now you can't live with what you've done. The lies we tell ourselves are destructive. The truth, if told too late and for the wrong reasons, can be even worse. Her conversation with Robert was a mistake and another disaster, and picked up the phone but then slowly put it down. Robert was right. She had nothing to say to him or anyone else. She had destroyed everything. Christmas came and went. Beth softened, and the family gathered on Christmas Eve to feast and exchange gifts. Anne was invited but knew it was better not to attend. No one wanted her there. A few weeks later, Anne was on a long conference call when her father called and told her she needed to take an emergency call. Robert was in a psychiatric ward for observation. He had attempted suicide. He hadn't shown up at work for 2 days. The police were called because Robert was found sitting with a loaded gun and a suicide note. Would she come? She was listed as the emergency contact in his office and was already on her way when her colleagues provided Robert's room number and the doctor's name. By the time she arrived, Anne had composed herself and demanded to see her husband and his doctors immediately. At the meeting, there were 2 doctors, both certified in psychiatry, one of whom was the author of a respected textbook. The other was the principal investigator leading a national study on depression and suicide in middle-aged men. One of them said, "Your husband is very ill. He is in a state of clinical depression, has developed a suicide plan, and has taken steps to obtain a weapon. He poses a clear danger to himself, if not to others. We are taking him off heavy medication in hopes of giving him a chance to regain his strength. Whatever brought him to this state was a shock, but he isn't telling us what it was. We were hoping you could help us with that." And concocted a story that perhaps didn't make sense. The doctors made their careful notes and talked among themselves, as if it meant something. It didn't help Robert. She needed to talk to him. "I want to see my husband." "When can I see my husband?" "We can certainly allow you to see your husband, but it must be through a two-way mirror. Right now, we can't risk anything that might worsen Robert's condition. Sadly, this may include a meeting with you." Was that a bruise on one side of his face? He hadn't shaved in weeks, and his hair. Had it even been cut since she last saw him? Had he ever washed? The hospital gown revealed his scrawny legs. He looked old, abandoned, homeless, and unkempt. His hands were in handcuffs. His head lolled from side to side. He was muttering something under his breath, a word she couldn't make out. What was he doing with his fingers? She moved closer to the glass. The attending doctor didn't stop her. His fingers, was he pointing at something? The ceiling? The walls? Did Robert see her? It seemed like he sensed her presence and started yelling louder. Was he shouting her name? It seemed too, and that he was. Was Robert mimicking shooting himself with his hand and fingers? Was he aiming at his head? Was he still trying to end his life? And left without saying a word. For the first time, she realized what she had done and understood what she needed to do. Visiting hours ended at 8 p.m. At 7:30, a family van pulled up with what looked like a mother and daughter coming to visit their husband and father. The security check was superficial. While the guard was distracted, the mother handed her purse to the daughter through the metal detector. No one noticed. Just before closing, the daughter left, and the mother went upstairs. Psychiatric wards are primarily designed to keep patients in, not to keep people out. And hung her coat on a hook and donned a starched white lab coat, carrying a clipboard and a sample tray, and slipped onto the floor, and surprisingly, she had no trouble finding the key at the sleeping nurse's station to enter Robert's room. How long she sat there before him and didn't know. It seemed like hours. Gradually, as the effects of the medication wore off, Robert came to. She must have dozed off, and when she looked again, Robert was conscious and staring intently at her. "Why are you here?" "You asked me to come, and I am your wife." Robert looked away. "Robert, you told me what you wanted. You told me what to do." Out of the corner of his eye, he watched as she pulled a small gun from her pocket. "I know you want to die. Because of what I did, you want to die. And so do I. We once had a good life together. Let's end it the same way. I'll go first, then you. And maybe we'll see each other on the other side." Robert looked at his wife. He saw in her the girl he married and all the good times they ever had. She had her plan, but he had his own. To Anne, it felt like Robert was looking at her for the first time, and she had never felt more uncertain. "Give me the gun. Check the hallway." And handed him the gun. The hallway was empty. She thought her mind would be racing, but it wasn't. What would it be like to end her life? Could she do it? Could she put the gun to her head and pull the trigger? It sounded like a plan, but it really wasn't. She was running away from her own life, part of and hoped that after death, they would truly be together. If not, at least she would share her husband's fate. In their shared decision to end it all, there was a dignity that and could accept. They come by every half hour. Keep an ear out. After the next round, we'll do it. And watched. It was her duty. She owed it to her husband to join him. Her throat tightened, but she could do it, and had to see it through. It was the only way to fix all the pain and suffering she had caused. She closed her eyes and whispered a small prayer to whoever might hear, hoping that she and Robert would be together forever. And it's time. Let's do this. Sit on the bed. You first. She hadn't been this close to Robert since that night, and it made her nervous. But it made sense. The gun would fall where Robert could reach it. She took the gun, and thought it would be colder. She shouldn't hesitate, she thought. Placing the barrel to her temple, she mouthed, "I'm sorry," to her husband and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. She pulled the trigger again, and again nothing. And again. What was wrong? Everything was going awry. She intended to free Robert and be with him, but the gun didn't work. She looked up, her hands occupied with her final failure as a wife, her eyes filled with tears. What a terrible risk. So many ways it could have gone wrong, Robert shuddered. Even as he left that night, Robert knew and would muster all her strength to find him. She would have put her entire staff on it, called everyone, hired professionals, and bribed newspaper employees to report on him. She told herself she was just trying to find her husband when, in reality, she was trying to control him. First, find him, then soothe him with love and guilt. Gently, she would coax him back from the brink and allow things to return to where they had been. Maybe Robert could reconcile with his wife, but he would never tolerate Anne's parade of new lovers. Life or death, that's what it all came down to. Would his marriage to and live on or die? Robert couldn't say. Robert realized and was ready when she showed him the gun. It was easy enough to take it from her and unload it. But none of this drama mattered if it didn't play out the scene to the end. Robert didn't think she would do it. She might put the gun to her head, but she would never pull the trigger. To his amazement, and squeezed the trigger. How could she do it? With reverence, Robert looked at his wife and saw her in a completely new light. He smiled, and then looked at him in confusion. Robert opened his left hand to reveal the bullets. His right hand reached out to her, and then took his hand and pulled him close. She held on to him for a long time. "It's time to go home, wife." And they lived happily ever after. Yes, it took some time, very good lawyers, and a lot of effort to convince the medical staff before they were allowed to leave. Who was at fault? Does it matter? Who deserved more to be blamed? Who cares? Life is short. Love is scarce. When you find true love, dig in and hold on. Never give up. Pray for reinforcements and fight to the end.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments.